Welcome to the Consulting Success Podcast. I'm your host, Michael Zapersky. In this podcast, we'll dive deep into the world of elite consultants, where you'll learn the strategies, tactics, and mindset to grow a highly profitable and successful consulting business.
Hey, it's Michael Zapersky, and today I'm very excited to have Chris Kneeland joining us. Chris, welcome.
Thank you, Michael. Great to be here.
I'm excited for this, Chris. Let's just start off and have you share with everyone, if they're not familiar with your work, what it is that you do.
Well, I'm the co-founder and CEO of a marketing consultancy called Cult Collective. We're headquartered in Calgary, Alberta, and we work with a North American brand. They tend to be these sort of iconic, high-affinity brands that reap disproportional benefits with word of mouth and advocacy-based marketing. So we've been doing that for about the past 8 years. And then through the process of birthing that company and serving those clients, we stumbled upon another opportunity over the past couple of years, servicing the agencies and the consultancies that also cater to these large companies with a company called Communo.
Yeah, I want to explore for everyone really to get your insights both on how you've built these businesses so that other consultants can apply those principles and strategies to their own consulting business, but also some of the knowledge of how you actually apply these best practices and techniques for the benefit of your clients, and see how other consultants and consulting firms may also be able to benefit from those. But let's just start with, you run a cult, not in the sense that most people think, but just tell us more about what the word cult means to you and why you chose it for your company.
Yeah, it's funny. I just came from a speaking gig in Europe, and I was very sensitive to how this was going to translate, because cult has a negative connotation in English, and I didn't know how much more negative it might be in Spanish or German or French. And it's about the same. Cults are typically thought of as brainwashing organizations that convince people to do weird things. But I read a book in the early, maybe around 2009, 2010 by a guy named Douglas Atkins, who went on to have a very successful career at Airbnb, called The Culting of Brands. And it just really spoke to me. It spoke to all these principles that allow people to become hyper affinity towards religion or towards cult leaders, could also be manipulated, for lack of a better word, to allow people to fall in love with brands and with organizations. And so we actually have seen that over the past decade. There's actually been a decline in participation in organized religion and an uptick in people's alignment with brands that give them a sense of purpose, a sense of community, and a sense of shared values.
So that's really interesting. I've seen kind of this term of cult, or creating a cult-like following in a positive way, just become part of conversation more often. And I think the first question that stands out to me is when you talk about brands being able to apply this kind of cult-like following, or the benefits of creating what people would see as a cult, is that something that is only available to brands, or is that something that even a consulting firm or even a solo independent consultant can do for themselves?
Yeah, it's typically, so our hypothesis when we started this research 8 years ago is that it was mostly akin to high affinity categories within B2C companies, the Converses, the Red Bulls, the Victoria's Secret. There in your neck of the woods, Michael, is a great cult brand, Lululemon. So that's where we started the work. And a few years into it, we discovered that it could equally apply to nonprofit organizations. And then we discovered it could apply to destinations, places like Vegas or Manhattan or Iceland or Austin, Texas. And then this year, actually at an event called The Gathering, which we might talk about in a few minutes, we're actually recognizing personas, celebrities, politicians, people that have created cult-like followings around their ideas. Really the symptoms, just to run it through quickly, are people that have higher than normal meaning their peer set, their competitive set, brand attachment. Brand attachment is a metric that speaks to the level of emotional buy-in. So people don't just like these brands or these people, they love them, they adore them. They have higher than normal word of mouth or advocacy. So that means that they tend to spend lower than their competitive set on traditional media. And they tend to do things like discount less. Many cult brands like Apple, Starbucks, Harley Davidson, Nike, they're all at premium price points. So we're just fascinated by that. If you can get somebody to pay more and be more loyal while spending less on advertising and less on discounts, that seemed like a recipe we wanted to understand.
Definitely. I mean, that would create a significant advantage for anyone that would apply that. So let's just talk a little bit more tactically for a moment for the professional services firm and the consulting business. What are some of the key principles or ideas? And I know we can't get into all of them in the time that we have today, but maybe just a few that stand out for you of the biggest bang for your buck or the biggest impact that someone could have by implementing.
Yeah, well, I mean, the first thing I'd advise is it's always easier as a consultant to apply these principles to your clients. If you're going to drink your own Kool-Aid and try to follow your own recipes, it all starts with what is even your we call it your noble brand purpose. What's the ethos of your organization? What are you even seeking to do? There's far too many business owners and consultants that just want to be successful or just want to be profitable. And that's not the starting point for a cult brand. Cult brands want to be significant and they want to be purposeful. And the success is a means to that end, not the end itself. There's a lot of tactics around their go-to-market persona. How relatable, how human are you? We're believers that all business is personal. So the more that you can humanize your organization rather than trying to create this aura of being a corporation or an entity that is either soulless or personality-less. So cult brands tend to dial up these things that feel wildly human and wildly enjoyable. It's like somebody you'd want to hang out with. I can say Harley Davidson and you think of a person. I can say Gatorade and you think of a person. Not many consultancies have that kind of relatability. And then maybe the last one I'd throw out there is cult brands do a really great job of listening. So often as we're trying to build our businesses and become known, we talk a lot, we write a lot, we speak a lot. We want everybody to hear us. And yet some of the most cult-like brands on the planet listen really well. And then they respond to the things that they're hearing. And we call that co-creation, where they value their audiences for more than just their dollars. They value them for their voice. That voice either makes their products and offerings better, or that voice is turned out to create referrals. So you have this non-commissioned sales force driving business to your door.
This is very powerful. I mean, I can see how if you're listening very well, you can pick up on what your ideal clients in the marketplace that you're serving really wants, how you can then take that, make sure that your brand is more human, kind of centric and personable through maybe your language and that you're using and images and so forth. But then what do you do next? I mean, is it about applying that to like just your website and your LinkedIn profile? Is it making sure that all of your ads also support that more human-centric and kind of personable focus? Is it about creating videos? Maybe if you could just offer a couple of tactics or a couple of examples that might be more relevant for a celebrity or a personal type of brand or a professional services type of business.
Yeah, well, it really boils down to, I wouldn't start any of the places, frankly, that you just suggested. Too quickly, we default to marketing communications type things, and we talk about how can we communicate our value better, whereas cult brands focus on how do you create value better. So I would start first and foremost with your positioning. Your single most powerful business development tool is your positioning. How do you want to be known? And, far too many, particularly consultants, there's just a sea of sameness. There's no obvious differentiation. And one of the biggest problems is that they're just a little too appealing to everybody. And whenever we're consulting with a consultant, we talk about at a minimum, your positioning should alienate 50% of the people that read it. They 50% of the minimum should say, that's not for me. I would never hire somebody like that. And if you're really going to be a master class, 80% of people would stumble across your material, your website, the name of your webinar, and say, either that's not for me or I disagree, right? So you've got to have very provocative positioning supported by really persuasive proof points. And then those proof points become, what's your proprietary product? What's your IP? What's your research? What's your point of view that allows you to defend whatever it is that your positioning might become? So whatever you're packaging and whatever you're selling needs to be applying these cult-like principles more so than what your videos or your website or your brochures are saying.
Yeah, I think that's very important. You spent some time teaching at Mount Royal University, I believe, where I read that, you show students that marketing isn't about getting people to buy, it's about getting them to buy in. What's the difference?
Well, it goes back to that symptom of a cult brand and the emotional investment. It's a metric that's actually called brand attachment, but it's who's rooting for you, who wants you to be successful, who's going to forgive you and give you the benefit of the doubt when you screw up, right? We all need a lot of grace because we're all going to make a mistake. We're not all going to be like Lulu and sell a pant that's see-through, or Chipotle that sells burritos that make you sick, or United that throws passengers off of planes, but everybody's going to make some kind of mistake. And cult brand followers are so aligned with what you're trying to accomplish, they'll give you the grace for messing it up. And we certainly need that in consultative meetings. There'll be a bad meeting. There'll be a miscommunication. There'll be a miss where the recommendation fell flat. And what you want is a second chance at that, and that done with enthusiasm rather than somebody doing it begrudgingly.
And Chris, I think many people listening to this will go, well, that makes sense. I know instinctively that I really should focus more on a specific type of ideal client. And they've probably heard the importance of polarization in their messaging and marketing communications, but there's still fear around that, right? Many people don't do that because they're concerned they might miss out on opportunities, or they might offend someone, or they just might not grow because they're going too narrow. What has your experience shown you in terms of really going narrow and polarizing?
Well, I empathize. It is scary, but it's the sign of an unsophisticated or immature professional to not do it. You will eventually learn it is the only way to success. I didn't start my career birthing a consultancy called Cult. I graduated to that point where I realized there's probably in any given year about 500 businesses would qualify. And that's scary if you're a more traditional consultant or advertising professional, marketing professional, when there's tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands. But the reality is I only need about a dozen, right? So to satisfy the size of our firm, if I can onboard about a dozen new clients, about one a month, then I'm doing great. And I don't need thousands of prospects in order to do that. I need a few good hundred, and then really trustworthy marketing tactics that will allow my close rate, my conversion rate to bring in our goals.
Definitely. So let's talk about what's worked for you with your consulting business and agency over the years. I mean, when you started the business, how did you go about getting clients, and really what worked best for you early on?
Well, so we tried our best to practice what we preach. So we leaned into a very provocative positioning, almost daring people that they're not. It was all about, are you cult capable or are you cult worthy? Like, we created a bit of a scorecard that would allow people to do a self-assessment to determine if they even had the criteria. Now, this was after a couple of years of getting the persuasive proof points, right? We knew what the 6 cult brand principles were. We knew what the attributes were. We were able to name drop. These are the brands that we were able to reverse engineer. We didn't just hang the shingle on day one and with a point of view. I had our day jobs, and on the side of our desks was doing the research that would allow us to now say, let's take the plunge. But 3 weeks in, Harley Davidson called. We were giddy, and Harley Davidson says, we're looking for some new marketing help. And we are a cult brand. We are, and even that language resonated with them. And they said, and we're fearful that we might be losing some of that status, particularly amongst younger shoppers, the millennial crowd. And it seems like you can help us. Now, if you're Harley and you're trying to retain your cult-like status, who are you going to go to? Well, you'd go to the doctor that claims some expertise in cult brand status, right? So Harley would never have called if we hadn't done that. And we also made the very tough decision that we were going to be different than all of our other peers by not responding to RFPs. So if we weren't going to wait for other people to decide, hey, I have a need, and if you're lucky, I'll pick you. We kind of consider that like an episode of The Bachelor where these clients are doling out roses and we're all begging to get one. We said, screw that. Let us go find the brands that are in jeopardy of losing their cult-like status, or have the DNA of a cult brand but haven't capitalized on it yet and are selling themselves short of their potential. So we had an outbound sales effort that went into these few hundred businesses that we had opinions about. And we were much more interested in quality than quantity, right? We don't subscribe to the fact of doing a bunch of say and pray marketing where you hope 1% does something. We would send out a few hundred things and expect to have 40, 50 phone calls from that. And so it was much more surgical.
What did that look like? If you can kind of break down kind of the step-by-step that you went through with that outbound sales effort, what were the actual steps that you were taking? Was it a letter or a postcard, a follow-up phone call?
While we work with a lot of seasoned and experienced consultants here at Consulting Success, I'm often contacted by new early-stage consultants. Invariably, the question I'm asked is, what are the steps I should take to become a successful consultant and grow my consulting business to my first 6 figures per year? Well, I'm excited to announce that we've opened the doors for our Momentum program. This is our most popular program for early stage consultants, and it has helped almost 1,000 consultants to start, run, and grow successful consulting businesses. It gives you the step-by-step plan to help you with your messaging, your fees, and pricing strategies, how to win more proposals, how to go to market more effectively, developing a marketing system to generate leads consistently, and so much more. And right now, until September the 19th, you can sign up for Momentum and get 50% off the regular price by going to consultingsuccess.com/audio. That's consultingsuccess.com/audio, AUDIO. Only 100 spots are available to join Momentum and get 50% off. This deal is only available until September the 19th or until all 100 spots are gone. We won't be opening up new spots in this program for several months, so don't wait. Go to consultingsuccess.com/audio. That's consultingsuccess.com/audio, AUDIO.
Yeah, the first was identifying the list of the prospects, right? And then we started putting those into cohorts. So I remember one of them in the early days was retail. One of them was quick serve restaurants. One of them was automotive. So we would formulate, okay, these are the 6 prospects, 12 prospects by those categories. And then we needed to have an opinion about those categories. So we would apply some of our cult brand research into that category, and we would author typically a 3-page white paper and promote a webinar that basically presented that white paper. And then we would go out and we would solicit, usually either through a cold call or a spammy email. We would send something into the stakeholders that we could find within those organizations, inviting them to download the white paper or to attend the webinar. And now I think we just did enough job creating intrigue. Everybody kind of likes to benchmark themselves. Everybody kind of would be curious, how good am I in terms of a scorecard? And so our ability to say we can help you determine your cult worthiness based on these 6 criteria, it got people curious. And then those conversations led into, well, here's the deficiencies, here's the areas that you didn't score as well, which led into, we can help you in those areas.
So just to understand and make it very clear, you identified the people, you made phone calls to them, or you sent emails. That was promoting a white paper for their specific industry. So let's just say retail would be one. You had a 3 to 5 page white paper for retail brands, and you would invite them to a webinar that you would host that would kind of outline what the white paper was all about, or similar type of content, really explaining the scorecard. Or when did the scorecard kind of come in for them to have the opportunity to go through that and get some data for you?
Yeah, so the white paper would be industry specific, and then the scorecard would be client specific, right? So they would say, these are the trends and the pros and cons that we're seeing in the industry, and then click here to take your own scorecard to find out how you think you're doing compared to your competitive set. And then that scorecard was all behind gated content, right? So in order to do so, they'd have to leave their contact information. And then we would simply follow up. And we noticed you got a 60 out of 100, or you got an 80 out of 100. And are you interested in having a conversation about how to close the gap?
And how well did that work for you when you first launched it?
Yeah, no, I think that was sort of our primary path for new business. Because like I said, we weren't waiting for somebody else to determine they have a need, let me go out and look for hiring somebody. We had to create a need. We had to create dissonance in their minds of saying you may not be doing as well as you think you are. And then that, to this day, we're 7 years old now, and that remains one of our primary outbound activities.
What would be one of maybe the biggest changes or a tactic or a strategy that you're using different from that one that you've honed more recently today compared to that back then? Like, is there anything new in terms of technology or tools or an approach that you just found to work even better?
Well, I mean, we certainly do more promotion of the white papers, and like we just launched one yesterday, for example. Every month, we typically do one a month. Our goal is, like I said, to try to get a fish on the line every month. And cannabis just got legal in Canada, right? And so we have an opinion about how cannabis brands and cannabis businesses should be engaging their audiences to do more than just sell weed, but to create heightened levels of affinity. So the difference between what happened yesterday and what would have happened 7 years ago, we just do more promotion of that via Instagram or via LinkedIn, or even just via, we've got thousands of emails now just in our database over time. So we might shout a little bit louder that this content is now available, but essentially the thinking that goes into the white papers and the webinars has largely been the same.
And when you talk about promotion, is it promotion like just manually through you and your team's own accounts, or are you using paid traffic, paid acquisition, paid media to get the word out?
A little bit. I think maybe $5,000, I think, is sort of the monthly paid media buy that would go into those different social channels. And that's largely because we're trying to extend our reach. That we have about 10 geographies that we're particularly interested in. So we'll goose our efforts with some geo-targeted ads in those specific geographies.
Makes sense. Chris, you said that entrepreneurs will not succeed in today's rapidly changing marketplace by relying heavily on full-time employees. This strikes a chord for many consultants who want to scale their consulting business. Explain your thoughts and beliefs and experience regarding that statement.
Yeah, thank you. This is a chance to kind of bring up the community. So Cult, when we started Cult 7 years ago, is a traditional consultancy. We never really call ourselves consultants. We consult, but we've always thought of ourselves more as a firm or as an agency that provides more than just advisory services. We assist with elements of the implementation of our advice as well. And our name was actually the Cult Collective. And Cult referred to our provocative positioning about customers, or businesses should have more than customers, they should have cult-like followers. And Collective referred to our operating model, our ability to tap into a network of subject matter experts that weren't necessarily on the payroll. And that collective, I think, started with 8 or 12 maybe kind of preferred service providers that could provide our clients with some niche things as they implemented our ideas, like build me a website, improve my store experience, give me some employee training materials. It grew to about 75 businesses when we realized, holy hell, this collective has taken on a life of its own. And so we started to put some energy into figuring that part of the business out. And we realized that every consultancy needs to deal with scale. Not every consultancy needs to deal with staff. And staff is more often than not, staff are a liability, not an asset. Because if you don't have your staff fully utilized, they are now costing you money and they're distracting you to find work with the intention of getting them billable rather than finding work with the intention of solving interesting problems. And so you talk to a whole bunch of consultants and small agency owners, and they're wildly discontent because they almost feel like they're running a daycare. Their job every day is to find things for their people to do rather than to find problems that they personally want to work on or clients they personally want to work with. And so we said, we got to get the staff part out of it. And the problem is that the vanity metric, even when you mentioned in my intro, tell us a little about yourself, maybe how big you are. Everybody wants to associate success with headcount. If I have 10 people, I'm less successful than if I have 50 people, regardless of what if I'm making $100 million of profit in one scenario, in debt in the other scenario. So what's important is profitability. And so Communo became a staffing, we basically think of it as Tinder for marketing service professionals, where there's a host of problems with bringing on freelancers or contingent workers, but a lot of those problems, frankly, have worked themselves out over the past few years, largely through both technology and through just more sophisticated entrepreneurs. I think that the stats in the States, about 40% of the workforce are going to be entrepreneurs by 2020, right? I mean, the world of entrepreneurship is exploding right now, and they're doing so with better expectations, better clarity around their products and offerings, better integration in terms of what is and isn't appropriate to outsource, et cetera, et cetera. So anyway, my point is simply any consultant that's trying to grow his business has a universal villain, and that villain is volatility. You do not know. It is getting worse, not better, the unpredictable nature of what am I going to be working on 1, 3, 6 months from now. So why would you burden yourself with an employee that expects a paycheck every 2 weeks, regardless of the health of the business, by absorbing that volatility in-house? I want to outsource that volatility and just have access when needed to great talent.
Definitely. And there's so many options available to people these days, whether it's services like TopTal or Fiverr or 99 Designs, or, I mean, regardless of the industry and what you're doing at Communo, I mean, there's just so many places that people can go to get support in different industries. And I completely agree with you. I think bringing on a full-time employee right out of the gate, unless you have a very specific reason for it and a very good plan, and it's extremely strategic, it's probably better to start off as a bit of a contract or a bit of a freelance type of role and build from there.
Yeah, but I wouldn't even say start off. When we started, it was a bit of a cheat because we had a running head start in the sense that we birthed it out of some existing agencies. So we had some clientele and we had about 45 people. Every year, we have grown our revenues and profits and cut our headcount. So it wasn't like, well, let's just use this outsource model until we get big enough and more stable. In fact, our stability is directly correlated to the outsource model. Well, we're now bigger than we've ever been, and I've got 22 people on full-time staff. There's some things I would never outsource, like client relationships and our core competency of what we call our engagement officers, who are masters of the cult brand principles. But everything else is basically commoditized. And if we need some design help or some copywriting help or some videography help or some digital help, I don't need 2,000 hours of that on a yearly basis to warrant a full-time hire.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head right there. I mean, that's just real gold, is for people to get very clear on what are the high value activities and actions and work compared to the low value. And that's the low value is what you want to be outsourcing or getting others to do. So what you've been doing is a great example. So Chris, you teach, you run an agency, you have, I guess, 2 businesses. We haven't even talked yet about your event called The Gathering, I believe. In addition, so like you're doing a lot, right? Some people would look at that and say like, that's a lot going on. I'm very interested to know, how do you manage your time? What does your kind of daily schedule look like that allows you to be focused and productive and keep all these things moving forward?
So I spend most of my time on Cult. And when we birthed Cult, it was a business partner and myself, and we were 50-50 partners spending all of our time on Cult. And as I mentioned, as the collective started to become a bigger thing, we decided, let's divide and conquer. So he spends most of his time on Communo. I spend most of my time on Cult. And it's really probably a half a day a week that we swapped, where he'll kind of get into the weeds on what's going on with Cult, and I'll get into the weeds on what's going on with Communo. Things like teaching, I consider that my playtime. That's hobby time. That's fun for me to be able to do. So I would stop that in a minute if I felt like it was infringing on my ability to be a good husband or father or employer. It's a great way for me to nurture some talent for our own pipeline. It's a great way for me to get some cheap talent to do research and help me do things that I need for my day job by having the students do it. And it's just good for my ego. I like sitting in a room full of people that are lapping up all the things that I have to say as if it's gospel. And so I really enjoy the teaching. I just do it on an adjunct basis in the winter semesters when it's kind of cold and miserable here in Calgary.
And when it comes to being strategic or just kind of doing, I guess, the most strategic work within the organization, when do you do that? Are you typically doing that in the morning? Is it once a week? Is it daily at a certain time? How do you ensure that you have everything moving forward properly in the business? You know, everything's kind of running well, but you still create enough time for you to be strategic and work on the business.
Yep. So my personal style is I shoot up out of bed. I don't set an alarm. My body is just kind of conditioned from years of doing this that I'm usually up by 5:45 or 6 a.m. It's also a really great time for me because my family's not typically up and running around at that time. And I've just got on my calendar, unless I'm traveling or something, I have my calendar from 6 to 10 a.m. blocked off as what I call productive time. So I don't want to be sitting in commute traffic. And I remember the day it hit me. I remember thinking to myself, if I was ever the boss, I would work later so I don't waste 45 minutes of my morning sitting in traffic. I was like, wait a second, you idiot, you are the boss. So I just told my staff the next day, hey, I don't want you to think I'm slack. I am working, but I'm better at home, not having wasted time in the shower, getting ready or sitting in the car. So I'm in my pajamas doing my speech writing or my productizing or my client service kind of email communications, usually in the morning. And then around 9:30 or 10, I run out of gas, and I gave myself a good 2.5, 3 hour sprint at that. And that's when I'll then get showered. And then I usually line up calls during my drive-in so that can be really productive. And then I'm usually home I usually try to leave the office around 6. And my nights are for my family. So I certainly feel like I have a pretty manageable, I put in a good 10 or 11 hours a day, and I don't slave on nights and weekends trying to keep the businesses afloat. If part of what I've done here is I'm trying to make a life, not just earn a living, and that deals with having some proper balance and boundaries.
100%. So important. Finally, let's explore the event, because there's many people who consider at some point creating an event or hosting some kind of a discussion panel or even small little breakfast group that they can moderate with ideal clients in the room. You've now built a very significant event from what I've seen and just kind of taking a look at it online. But maybe start off, just tell us, why did you create the event and really what's it all about?
Yeah, well, I think your listeners might like this because I'll tell you, the event is not anything like what we thought it would be. There are still advantages of it, but boy, proceed with caution. So when we birthed Cult, our biggest fear was that people would wonder, who are these nobodies from Calgary is not known as a market that is producing tremendous thought leadership in the space of marketing and brand building. We love living here. We love raising our families here, but it's really a handicap, frankly, for what we're trying to do with our business. And so we had to find a way to make a splash, that something significant has happened that has kind of, it's agnostic and indifferent of where it has taken place. And so we looked at a few options, everything from writing a book to making a movie to doing a speaker circuit to hosting an event. And we landed on the event. It's called The Gathering. It's in its 7th year. We spent probably $250,000 the first year in what would be the equivalent of like having an amazing wedding. Right? What would you do who are you going to invite, and what's the catering going to be, and what's the entertainment? And it was a huge outlay of cash, a gigantic risk. And we had about 300 brands show up, and maybe a good chunk of them were kind of friends and family and sort of the low-hanging fruit within our sphere of influence. And it was really the attendees from that event that said, you got to do this again. And I was like, what do you mean do this again? That was a one-time splash. Cult is open for business. And they go, no, you're not thinking big enough. This actually has some substance behind it. And so we had to create, it is now a business. It has its own P&L. It's a 7-figure business, and it has 1,000 attendees that now come and a fair amount of industry cachet. But we had to make some concessions in order to do that. So first and foremost, the honorees, the people that come and speak at that event and are honored at that event, are hands off. Like they are not, this is not prospecting. We don't get to work with them at Cult. That's not the intention for while they're there. The attendees are fair game. We try to make sure that the attendees know that, hey, this was brought to you by Cult, and we share these kind of ideology. But that was different for us. We thought we might be able to work with these amazing Cult brands, and we had to make a decision. Do you want to work with these brands, or do you want to build an event that people will come to? And there has to be a separation of church and state there. And then even the people that came, I wouldn't say that the business development proceeds have warranted the level of effort. I can't say we do this event in February and then the phone starts ringing in March and that stilled our biz dev pipeline. That again was maybe a hope in the beginning that never materialized. What the event does do for us is give us a tremendous amount of updated data about what the most iconic, beloved brands in the world are doing so that our products and offerings are better when we now go to some client that maybe doesn't even know about the event. But we can talk about the IP that we gleaned from helping organize that event and researching the brands that are coming. So it's certainly wildly amplified our confidence and our credibility that we know what we're talking about when we talk about these courageous things that Cult brands are doing.
Well, Chris, I certainly appreciate you just being very candid about what works with the event and what doesn't, because everything I've heard about events is they're a lot of work, and they're certainly not for everyone, or may not be the best step or activity that someone could pursue. But just kind of getting a sense of what's working for you and also what isn't, I think is going to be very helpful for many, including me. So thank you very much. Wind things down. I want to make sure that people can find you. What is the one single place that you would suggest that people kind of go to learn more about your work?
Probably cultideas.com is the best hub for both our IP around what Cult branding does for either consultants or their clients, as well as there's some content on there on the Believe page about some of the speaking that we do and some of my personal bio.
Fantastic. We'll have that linked up. We'll link up as well to your other business, Camino, and to the gathering, just so that people can explore and see what you're really working on and what you've been doing some great work with. So, Chris, again, thank you so much for coming on. Really do appreciate your time.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Consulting Success Podcast. For more episodes and to subscribe, rate, and leave a review, head on over to iTunes. And if you'd like to develop consistent lead flow and a highly profitable consulting business, learn more about our coaching programs at consultingsuccess.com.